Welcome. I'm Tony McCabe, and I'm in the privileged position of being a head teacher of a secondary school in Bolton and also being the proud father of four wonderful young people, three girls and one boy. And I should hasten to add at this point that neither of those positions qualifies me to be an expert in raising teenagers. So I think it was Tony Gaskin that said, "The wise learn from the mistakes of others. It's the fool that wants to make their own mistakes." And today you'll be hearing from some of the experiences and some of the mistakes that I've made and the lessons that I've learnt along the way, being privileged to be able to walk alongside young people. When I think about parenting teenagers, I'm taken back to an experience of when my son was about 10 years of age, and my parents had paid for him to go out on a go-kart track. So he went with his cousins and he was kitted up and he was awaiting instructions from the person in charge. He had his helmet on and all the safety gear, and the instructor went through these important rules. He said, first and foremost, this is the accelerator. And when you press the accelerator, this go-kart will go fast. Well, my son at that point just heard the word accelerator and go. And that's exactly what he did. As a father, with my wife watching from the sidelines, I did what every dad would do. I hurdled the barrier and I ran onto the race course. Even though it said no pedestrians beyond this point, I chased that go-kart for everything that I was worth. In my head, I was thinking the instructors told him how to go, but he's forgotten to tell him how to stop, or he'd failed to listen to that. He'd already gone. Consequently, he hit a barrier on the edge. The car spun out of control. Unfortunately, nobody was hurt. I've been in that position many, many times as a parent. It feels that the teenage years sometimes start and they go faster than you can ever imagine. It sometimes feels like our teenagers have set off on the race before we've had a chance to sit down and to go through the rules, go through the instructions, and to talk about boundaries. Added to that difficulty, there's lots of scientific research that says how the human brain develops. And the human brain is made up of many different sections, and we're told by science that the part of the brain that develops first in teenagers is the limbic system and the amygdala. And this is the part of the brain that features the heightened emotions of teenagers. This is the part of the brain that allows them to connect with others, which is why teenagers love to be surrounded by other young person. It's responsible for them reading people and their environment. It's responsible for them reacting quickly in response to their observations. But wouldn't it have been so much easier if the other part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, if that developed first? Because that part of the brain is enabling the young person to plan for the future, to organize themselves and to understand and sometimes calm their own emotions. But we're told by science that that part of the brain only develops fully and catches up with the limbic system by the age of about 25. So it's not surprising then that the teenage years are a challenge. If you look at a teenager, you can see their body is changing at a rate faster than any other time of their life. Their body is changing. The way in which their body functions is changing. They're growing facial hair. They're finding they're having periods and period pain. There's a lot of complications. Their voices are changing. They're talking differently. Their body looks different. And as if that isn't bad enough, it comes at a time when the young people get a heightened sense of their own self-awareness, a heightened sense that there might be people out there that can be their lifelong love partners that they've got to attract when their bodies are going through all this change and they can't even work out who they really are themselves. It's added to the pressures of living with social media, the need to look good, the need to make sure that that image is perfect for the situation. The need for the be real image to actually project part of the person's life that they want projected to the outside world. Living up to that pressure is an added difficulty for teenagers in the world today. So what do we do in the education system? Well, we hone them into a uniform and we force them to conform. We put them behind desks and we teach them how to learn things that will last them the rest of their lives. If at any point in human development, the teenage years, if anybody ever thought that that was the best time for them to learn, it begs a big question. It reminds me of when I was running the London Marathon a good few years ago. And I wasn't a very good marathon runner. My fastest marathon was just over 4 hours. And I remember on a not so good marathon time that I was running, and I came to the final 5 miles, and a very kind do-gooder who'd finished the marathon, she told me, in 2 hours 55 minutes, came alongside me and ran back the final 5 miles. And she said she was running to try and encourage runners that were finishing around 4:10, 4:15 along the way. And she told me about her race. She told me about the breadth of her experience and the things that I could do along the way to help me. I didn't say to her, but I remember looking at her and thinking, you've no idea what running this marathon is for me. If you can do a marathon in less than 3 hours, you've no idea the pain that I'm going through right now, because you've never run for this length of time. And it made me wonder that sometimes our teenagers, we might give them bits of advice, we might tell them bits about our own teenage years that we think these pearls of wisdom will help them in life. But I asked some young people what they thought the best things that we could do to support them as they're growing up. And one thing that they said is that adults nowadays have no idea what it's like living as a teenager in the world today. When you were our age, you didn't have Facebook, Snapchat. When you were our age, you didn't have the mobile phone to take home with you, that all the connections and every relationship that you'd had during the school day continued into the evening and into the weekend and into the holidays. You didn't have the pressure to live in a perfect way online as well as in reality. And they're right. So when I asked some young people, what would you want to say to parents today as they begin parenting teenagers? They said, don't compare us. And we'll try not to compare you to our mate's perfect parent. And that got me thinking. You see, our children often say that there are many other parents that allow their children to go on the AstroTurf and to drink alcohol, and it's okay because it's been bought by an adult and passed to them. Many other parents are okay with their child smoking an e-cig because it's better than a cigarette. We're told that every other parent is better because they don't have the strict rules that we have. Well, I've been looking for every other parent. I've not met anybody yet that actually shares those values. But I think it's important to recognize that our young people mustn't be compared to each other. You might be lucky and have a teenager who's an amazing young person who loves to study and that's their thing in life. But you might have a young teenager who loves to test the boundaries. And that's okay. That's about personality. And that's the kind of thing that we need support to support them through the teenage years. One of the young people that I spoke to, reflecting upon her life as a teenager, and even in the early years of her life, smiled and said, I didn't always win at noughts and crosses. It sounded like a bit of a flippant comment that she made to me, but on reflection, I started to think about what that was really about. She talked about a competitive dad who always had to win the race or had to win the board game or had to win the competition. I asked her how she felt about that, and she said, I'm glad that he did, because he taught me a sense of resilience. Now, I'm privileged to walk alongside young people as a head teacher and to see the parenting styles of so many different parents across our school. And the one thing that I've started to realize is that young people are incredibly resilient. In fact, if we go back to looking at the very first day that young people were born, the day that they were born, they coped with the most stressful situation in their lives and they survived. We were born resilient. And I have a theory that we need to work really carefully as parents, particularly as the teenage years, not to teach resilience out of our young people, but to encourage it. One of the young people that I spoke to said, "We always buried our fish." She was talking about family moments and she talked about this fondly. And I think by that she meant that they always suffered the difficulties in life, the hardships of losing a fish, losing a family pet. And they did that together. And they had a ceremony where they planted or buried the fish within their garden. That's important. It's important that we step alongside and we allow the opportunities of life to teach our young people things that will last them a lifetime. I'm saddened sometimes when I see young people at school texting their parents if they've had a difficult lesson or a difficult relationship or fallen out with a friend or a teacher, or they feel there's a great sense of injustice that's done. And the helicopter parent that arrives at the school office straight away saying, my son, my daughter's just texted me with this problem and I'm here to help them solve it. That deprives the young person of an opportunity to build resilience and to grow into a different person, a stronger person themselves. When asking some of the young people, what are the things that your parents did that were successful? I asked my own children, what's the best things that we could do to encourage you to behave well? And they said, we don't like a big long lecture when we get things wrong. We know we've got things wrong more often than not. But the most powerful thing that any parent has ever said to me is, I'm disappointed by what you did. One young person said their parents often shout at them a lot, but the most effective thing that they've ever said that's triggered there and changed them for good is making them reflect on what disappointed them by that action. You see, by saying that I'm disappointed by what you did is very different than saying I'm disappointed by you. It shows the young person that they're accepted and that will always be loved and accepted by you. But the action has damaged that relationship and created a bit of disappointment that can be resolved. I asked some young people, if you could say anything to adults about parenting teenagers, what would it be? And they said these three things. They said, first of all, make sure that you show empathy to your young teenager. Don't assume that you've experienced what it's like being a teenager in this era. Being a teenager 25 years ago is very different than it is today. Show your children that you accept them, even if you don't approve of some of the things that they choose. The choices are temporary, but the relationship with parents and carers is something that should last them a lifetime. And finally, help the young people make choices that they're mature enough to make, and don't let them make choices that they're not mature enough to make. So an example that they gave is that some young people at the age of 11 are asked what secondary school that they would like to go to, and that they choose what secondary school they'll go to. Some of the young people that I spoke to said, that's unwise. At the age of 11, you can't choose what education you want for yourself, and it'd be better to do that with the guidance of parents. They did add, though, that at the age of 16, choosing what college they go to or what courses they go on to, whether they're A-levels or BTECs or whether they do an apprenticeship, that's something that they fully want to be involved in. They also gave the example of being able to make choices that are short-term choices. So for example, a reversible choice, being allowed or making the choice to dye your hair a colour that isn't permanent and will wash out. The young people felt that it was a reasonable thing for the young people to be able to do. But being able to make a decision about something permanent, such as a piercing or a tattoo, was something that the young people felt that they maybe weren't mature enough to make at that time. So going back to parenting and sitting in a go-kart, parenting can be quite difficult, but perhaps one of the best and most important things that we need to be there for is when the go-kart crashes, to be there, to take them from the wreckage, to wipe them down, and to show them that they are loved and accepted.